Amanda West. I'm the Inspections and Front Desk Supervisor at Layton and Scobrie.
So we're going to talk to you about Section 8 vouchers, the Housing Choice Voucher, and kind of just a little bit about the Layton Housing Authority. I think sometimes people just think of us as low-income housing, which that's a piece of what we do and a big piece of what we do. But we also have a tenant-based services section. So we also provide some services to help with folks to get them to be self-sufficient, to get off of subsidized housing. We also provide, we have a family support specialist on staff. And that person, her goal is to we refer the housing specialist will refer clients to the family support specialist for folks who are having difficulties with maintaining their housing. We don't want them to lose that housing, so she tries to connect them with services for barriers that they have to maintaining that housing. So that's a little bit about what we do. I'm going to go through some eligibility stuff, what our tenants have to go through to get assistance through us, and then Amanda's going to talk more about the inspections part. Are any of you guys current or past landlords who have rented to Section 8 tenant holders? Okay, good. We're always looking for more landlords, so that's why we got to do this with Josh contacted me to ask about coming out and presenting to you guys, because it's an opportunity for us to give you information to let you know about the program. I think one of the things that we talk about that's a barrier to bringing more landlords on, I think there's some misinformation out there. You hear the war stories, worst case scenarios, and that sometimes makes people shy away without having a complete understanding of what we do. So that's what we're here to give you that information. So there's some handouts, I don't know if all of you got them, to go through some information so that you'll have those on hand. We have 3,000, this didn't get updated. We actually have 3,079 vouchers. So we have a waiting list of people. We are typically helping the elderly, the disabled, or families. So if you are a single, non-disabled adult that applies for housing, you're going to be sitting on that waiting list for a long time. Because we have enough people that are ahead of that group between the elderly, the disabled, and the families that we're going to assist first. We also have, in addition to the regular Housing Choice Vouchers, we also have VASH vouchers. So it's Veterans Administration Supportive Housing. So they will identify homeless veterans, and we work with the VA to coordinate getting them in and getting them assisted either through project-based vouchers. The Veterans Administration has a project-based building called Victory Park on campus that we work with them to get vouchers for folks who are eligible there. We also have Main Street vouchers. So we have people who are between 18 and 62 who are disabled. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have to have Social Security disability, but a doctor saying they're disabled, they're going through the process, they're not able to work. And so we can assist them and provide a little additional assistance for them in getting housing. Because one of the things that we don't do that applicants are always wanting us to do is we do not go out and find housing for them. So they get a voucher with us and then they're on their own to go look for places. We have lists that we can give them. We keep a list of landlords that accept housing and are okay with getting a voucher. We'll give that to them. We'll also refer some sites to them, which is in here as well. But that's the gist of what our program is, different vouchers that we have. We also do have a security deposit program that is on a contract through the City of Lincoln. So if someone needs assistance with a security deposit, we can help them if they're referred to us through a case manager and they're homeless, and we can provide that assistance with the security deposit if they're eligible. So for Section 8 housing, it's low-income based housing. It's subsidized by HUD, the Federal Housing and Urban Development Agency. So we have our contract with them, we get funded by them. So there's the income guidelines on it. So on page 4, for a family of 1, it's $33,600 is the income guideline. If they're over that, then they're not eligible based solely on income. But it goes through the different income levels it's based on household, so it goes up with the number of people in your household. We also have preferences. So our wait list, we do a wait list poll every month. Some people are on the wait list for years. We're currently about a year behind. We're less than a year out now on applications that will pull. So, but we also have preferences. So if someone comes through and they're homeless, then they apply. If they're an elderly family or disabled person and they're homeless and we can verify that, they move up to the top of the wait list, and so they'll get pulled off of that wait list every month. We go through all of the preferences we have, and we're able to pull those off. We also have a rent-wise class. I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard of that. So it's an educational class for tenants. The thought of that is it's teaching them how to be a good tenant, giving them some information, so it's hopefully helpful to landlords when they know that they've gone through that. They're maybe more willing to rent to them. But if they go through the rent-wise class, that gives them a preference that they move up on the wait list for that. We also have a preference for domestic violence. So if someone's in a domestic violence situation, that will move them up on the wait list as well. We do the initial eligibility is done, and then after that, once someone's been found eligible, they have ongoing eligibility. We look at them every year or every other year if they're disabled or elderly. We skip them and we only look at their eligibility every year, thinking they're pretty fixed income. There's not a lot of household changes or other information that changes, so we look at them every other year. We send out letters for landlords when someone's eligible. We call it a rent letter. So we send out, every time we do a review for someone, we send out a letter to the tenant and the landlord to let them know, here's the portion that LHA is going to pay, and here's the portion that the tenant's responsible for, so that you guys are well aware of that as well as the tenant is. We also have, so HUD sets fair market rates, and that's what we use to determine what we call our payment standard. So we don't just have someone go out and search for an apartment wherever they want and get our rent, anything, regardless if it's an $800 apartment or a $1,500 or a $2,000 apartment. We have fair market rates, and so Amanda and her team look at rent reasonableness. So we won't rent to, if a landlord's saying, I'm going to charge $1,800 for this, but every other similar unit in that area is only going for $1,100. We're not going to be able to prove that under rent reasonableness, and Amanda will go over that a little bit further. But so our payment standards currently right now, we tell a tenant what the target rent is, where we want them to look at rent. We let them exceed that, but it's the best bang for their buck. If they stay at target rent, that's the most that we're going to pay. And that means they'll pay the least amount of that if they're under target rent. So for a one bedroom, the current target rate is $647 a month. For a two bedroom, it's $827 a month. We also look at a tenant can't exceed 50% of their gross income a month towards their rent, because we don't want to set them up for failure. HUD says it's 40%. But because we're a move-to-work agency, we get to waive some of HUD's requirements through agreement with them, and we said we want to be able to go up to 50% of their income just to give them more opportunities to look at different neighborhoods and to find a place to go, because we all know, you guys probably know too, rents have gone up a lot over the last few years, so it's harder to get a place just because of the rent amounts. So that's one of the things that we look at to try and help them out. So once a person's gone through, they've been pulled off the wait list, they get a letter telling them they're going to have an appointment to come in, they got to bring in all their documentation, we're going to look at eligibility for them. We typically make a decision within 60 days or sooner. Sometimes people come to that appointment, they've got everything we need right there, they've got all their pay stubs, all their bank account information, and we can do an eligibility determination right away. Once they've been found eligible, they have to go through what we call briefing class. That's a HUD requirement. So they're going to sit and learn about our program, how to work with landlords, how to go out and look for a place. Once they do that, then they get their voucher and they can go out to search. Do you want to go over that process?
Yeah, go over it.
So I'll let Amanda go over that list. Do any of you guys have any questions at this point? Okay, I'll let Amanda get.
Okay. So basically, once a tenant comes in, completes their voucher briefing class, they're issued their voucher right then and there. And basically, the way that the program then kind of kicks off is the assistance is tied to the tenant. So if they're out there searching and, you know, you might receive calls and they'll say that they've got a voucher, would you rent to them? And you're curious what that would look like for you if you've never taken housing. Basically, the tenant would give you that request for inspection form that they receive at the briefing. That has some of their information as far as what their max rent would be to stay under that 50% of their max rent. But then basically you fill out that packet of information, it's 3 pages, turn it into us, we schedule an inspection. We come out within 5 days of receiving that paperwork. Sometimes it's sooner, or if you've got a unit that's saying it's not going to be available to September 1st, for example, we could schedule it a couple weeks out. But then at that point, we come out and do the inspection. We're checking to make sure that the unit meets what we call minimum housing quality standards. So we always tell tenants to keep in mind that that may not be what their standards are, such as some of the cosmetic items. While we want the unit to be, safe and sanitary, we aren't going to be as concerned about, for example, a red stain on the carpet, where that may be, what makes them decide that they don't want the unit. So those are just things that we tell tenants, make sure you're walking through a property and that you would be okay living in that property as it is now. And then we tell landlords kind of the same thing to make sure that they have the unit ready to go as if they were ready to rent it that day. If we come out and try and do an inspection and, there's no flooring, there's no cupboards, it's still in the process of being renovated, for example, we would have to walk through that inspection and you would have to contact us once the unit's actually ready to inspect. When we come out and do the inspection, like Jodie touched on, we're also going to check to make sure that we can meet the rent that you're asking. So if there's 5 or more units that are comparable in the building, for example, if it's an apartment, we're going to ask that you give us 3 comparables to show that you're renting 3 units to non-housing tenants at the same rate, just basically to prove that you're not charging a housing tenant more than a non-housing tenant for discrimination purposes. If it's a house or a duplex, for example, we're going to search the market for comps. We have to find 3 comps to show that we can meet the rent that you're asking. So we're looking at similar amenities, real estate world, similar things to what everybody's going to look for, and they're looking for comparables. Yes?
Do you guys pull those comps, or do we provide them?
If it's an apartment complex, then we would ask you provide them if there's 5 or more units. Otherwise, we're searching the market to see what we would find. If for some reason we can't meet the rent that you're asking, then at that point you could come back and say, hey, there's 3 comps I found in the market, and we'll review them and plug those numbers into our system and see if we can make it work. I would say more often than not, we don't have that problem too often in Lincoln because the rents are pretty high. And most people know kind of what the market looks like. So then, we come out and do the inspection. If there's things that need to be fixed, we would let you know, write that in there, what needs to be repaired. At that point in time, you could decide, yes, I want to continue to move forward with this, and then you call us to come back out to do a recheck inspection once those repairs are completed. If at that point in time you say, no, you're asking way too much, I don't want to make those repairs, then at that point we would say, okay, that's fine. We'd issue the tenant a new voucher, and they would continue their search. So when we come out and do that initial inspection, you're not obligated to mean that, okay, if you're doing that inspection, you have to move forward with this. Another misconception that we get a lot is people think that if they take housing for one person, that means they have to open the gate for everybody, and that's not the case. Landlords are responsible for screening their tenants however they see fit. So we just say that, however you screen your tenants, just follow that same process across the board so that then there's no room for complaints or possible discrimination. But otherwise, if we have a lot of property managers, for example, that they may work with one owner that's willing to take housing and then have another owner that's not. So if you take one housing tenant, it doesn't mean that you have to take it for every unit. What else? So then if the unit passes inspection, great. We can either start the assistance the day that it passes or the day that the tenant moves in. So if they currently live there, it passes inspection today, we could start the assistance today. If it passed inspection today but they're moving in September 1st, we'd start it September 1st, okay? With that, we do offer an inspection incentive for any new tenant that you're taking, as long as they're not transferring from different units, within your same property line. But if you have a new tenant that you're taking with housing, we offer a one-time incentive payment. It's $200 for the landlord incentive, or if it passes the inspection the first time that we come out, so we don't have to come back out for a recheck, nothing failed in the unit, then you get a $400 incentive. With another program that Jodie touched on, that mainstream program, that's a $500 landlord incentive. And so basically that incentive is just, to help alleviate any costs with some of the repairs, things like that. Sometimes just, to help ease landlord sides when they think, okay, well, I'm taking a housing tenant, that might be a little bit more of a risk, things like that. So again, then if it passes inspection, we'd sign contracts with you. You keep your own lease. We do have several lease requirements. They're pretty common things that you would typically have in a lease, landlord name, information, address, tenant name, address. Any adults 18 or over have to be on that lease. We do have to have what appliances are provided by the owner. That's for your protection. Also, what utilities are paid by who, and it has to be broken down to show tenants paying this, landlords paying this. Has to have a renewal clause, so we require the initial lease term has to be 1 year, and then after that, it can go month to month, year to year, however you would like to renew it. It just has to be listed in that lease. And then again, anybody over 18 has to sign that lease. Landlord has to sign it and then return it to LHA. We sign a contract with the landlord and release the payment. It's pretty simple. Other than that inspection paperwork, the only thing that a new landlord would have to complete is what we call just the new landlord paperwork. It's tax information and direct deposit. It's pretty simple to get set up. We try and keep it as easy and quick as possible for you guys, because we know that you want to get those units rented. So just touching on the inspection too, it's not our inspection requirements, again, we go off of what's called housing quality standards. That's not going to be the same as a city inspection. So sometimes one thing that comes to mind is like smoke alarms. City requires smoke alarms in every single bedroom. Our requirements are a little bit different. We require them outside in the hallway. Unless it's a new construction, then they do have to be inside the bedrooms. But that's just an example. And power requirements might be a little bit different than the cities. So just keep that in mind. You do have the inspection checklist, the LHA inspection checklist in those packets that we handed out. And then there's also a good place to live, which is the HUD for sure on inspection requirements. Those are just a little bit different. Since, like Jodie mentioned, we're a work agency, so we kind of get to set some of our own rules. So those things as well. Yes?
On the skill positive program you mentioned earlier, when they move out and get the skill massive back.
The security deposit comes back to us minus any, if there's damages and there's part that you need to deduct out of that, then that part doesn't come back to us. Let's say they have a $500 security deposit, there's $300 of damages, then that $200 would come back to us. The landlord would cut us a check for that. It doesn't get returned to the tenant.
Returning back to the banker, finance, staffing,
Yep. And just to share, we have actually have a landlord advisory committee. So we have to, as a Move to Work agency, we have to present a Move to Work plan to HUD every year. And so we run that through our, we have a resident advisory committee and we have a landlord advisory committee, and we run that through there. And just some of the feedback when we've talked with the landlord advisory committee to ask them for suggestions, I was like, what we could do to try and get more landlords. One of the things that they have shared is, the thing that they like about it is they're like, there's a little skin in the game for the clients when they're on a vouchers, because if someone leaves your place and trashes it, moves out without notifying you, doesn't notify us, a tenant has to leave in good standing from a landlord or they don't get to keep their voucher. And so some of those people have waited for a voucher for a year. They don't want to lose that. So that's kind of an incentive that helps the landlord, is that those tenants are informed by us. If you leave and you're not in good standing with your landlord, you're going to lose your voucher. If they get evicted, they have a 3-year penalty before they can apply again for housing. So that's one of the things that's hopefully a draw to get landlords to come in because of that piece of that, where one of the things they talk about a lot is college kids moving in and they're like, if you guys have long-term lease people, like if LHA's got people that are long-term leases, it's better to take those than those college kids, because that's where the cost is having to flip and make that unit ready for the next tenant. So just some information that they've shared with us to let you know. Yeah.
Especially on the 3 and 4 bedroom, what percentage of your voucher recipients are actually paying rents either the 3 and 4 bedroom? Do you have an idea?
I don't off the top of my head. I don't know that. That actually is one of the things that I have to report on every year, but I don't recall that data. I can tell you HUD's requirement for any public housing authority is that our payment standard has to be between 90 and 100% of what HUD says is the fair market rate. So our fair market rent. So in 2021, the fair market rents come out from HUD every October. So in 2021, those came out. We jumped up our target rent, the payment standard, quite a bit. Last year, the fair market rents came out and they jumped up again. We were in the middle of a software conversion and having some staff turnover. So we were still within that 90 to 100% that HUD set. So we opted to not do it because we just didn't think the administrative review would be able to swing it and get it done. So this year we already planned, we anticipate the fair market rents are going to go up again by HUD. So we're anticipating we're gonna bump up our payment standard so that we can get more tenants.
But you said that if it was, it'd still be eligible to get the voucher, even though the unit that we're looking at is higher than these.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So I'm kind of curious what percentage would be paying actual rents above these?
Yeah, it's, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I do pull that every year. It was a smaller percentage than I thought because we allow them to go up to 50% of their income. And then as long as that passes rent reasonableness, it's their choice if they want to do that and take on more of that rent burden. So we do have that because one of the things that HUD looks for is if we're not isolating people into certain pockets, like low income pockets, we want to open that up so that they can go rent anywhere just like anyone else can. And so that's why we actually upped ours to 50% instead of HUD's 40%. But it's still a smaller number of people that utilize that than I would have anticipated, but I don't know off the top of my head.
So how many units do you rent out of it?
We have 3,079 vouchers.
That we're talking about actual units, like you actually own, you manage your.
Oh, the LHA? Okay. I think it's, don't quote me on this, but I think we have about 1,500 units between the apartment complexes we have. So we have market rent units, we have tax credit units, we have affordable units. So I think there's around 1,500 units of that. I don't know what you're thinking. Do you think so?
Yeah. Thank you.
So I think that there are multiple voucher programs in town. Maybe could you comment on others? And then I'm also curious, based on these rates, I've got a place on the market, and I just had someone come to me. It's a 3-bedroom, and then a voucher. It was like 1,800 or 1,900 or something. Is that something that's pre-approved, or is that someone else? Is that someone else's voucher program, or how do they exceed these limits based on the property or based on the first income?
So the target rent that they're told, the payment standard we have is for N1 at LHA, just depending on your household size. That's a standard.
It's flat, it applies there, but.
Yes. There are other programs in Lincoln that are not through the Lincoln Housing Authority. So there are other property owners who have tax credit programs. There are some community agencies that do a rapid rehousing program. There's also a homeless prevention program. I don't know if they use vouchers, if that's the terminology they use, or if it's just how our program operates. I'm not sure, but I don't have a whole lot of information about those.
And I was going to add, in the rapid rehousing program and supportive housing, we go out and partner with those agencies and do those inspections for them. But then they actually oversee the voucher and their program. We just partner with them to do their inspections. So just put that out there, because sometimes you might, if you're familiar with LHA, you might see the same inspector for a different, say for example, Community Action Support Housing Program will go out and do those inspections and work with them.
And some of those might be like short-term or temporary, but this is, I mean, aside, if their income grows enough, then they'll be graduated from the program. But this is for life if they continue to meet the requirements, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, so we do annual reviews every other year. So if someone got approved for housing, got their voucher yesterday, they turned around and got a job, they were working 20 hours a week, and now they're working 40 hours a week, we don't review their income for a year, because our thought is save up, because next year you're gonna get hit with a higher portion of that rent. But as long as they meet the income criteria that our portion, we're gonna always pay a piece of it, they'll stay on housing. It's not a time limited thing. We also have what we call a zero half portion of it. So if someone's income has gone up over the time that they've been on a voucher, and so their income's high enough now where they're paying the whole portion of it and we're not paying any of it, we give them a 6 month grace period where they get to keep their case open with us. So if something changes in there, their income goes back down, we can look at getting them back on with the voucher and getting them assistance other than making them go through the wait list. But if they retain their income and nothing's changed where they need our assistance during that 6 month period at the end of that, then the case will close.
No. I know this idea to like work the company and have a section in there. She will be done by a little bit. If I not need somebody to do on the phone to be still, how will they be these water frying?
So you'd have to,
The trouble is November of this year. So I'm concerned for the increased ends on the mountain title.
so if you want to do a rent increase, if you're looking at continuing that tenant, if you can get a rent increase, you're to turn those rent increases in 60 days in advance of it going into effect. 60 days so that at least our inspections department has time to do the rent reasonableness and check it. But if you don't have any plans of reviewing that lease with that person, then it's typically a 30-day notice, but you'd have to look at your lease because some people have leases and it says a 60-day notice, so you'd have to follow your lease.
What about this particular one in November? The other one is my new plan holiday that I still with a increase on 6 day, my day. I mean, the reason my mind is getting work whereas I just is doing it.
Yeah, so our requirement is 60 days. So if you had someone whose 12-month ends November 1st, you would need to get that in 60 days ahead of time to do that. And it doesn't matter if it's ending at that initial 12 months or if you have a 30-day clause, you still have to get it into us 60 days in advance of when you want that in effect so that we have time to process that, because then we need that time to process that rent increase, look at rent reasonableness, but then we still have to give our tenants a 30-day notice if their rent amount changes.
So in fact, they can be 30 days or 60 days.
It has to be 60-day notice to us for a rent increase.
What about
A non-renewal is a 30-day notice unless your lease requires more. You'd have to comply with your lease, but a minimum of 30 days. Anything else? Sure.
I have another question. I have a 2-bed apartment or a duplex fund on the market right now. I'm intending when the current debt moves out at the end of the month to turn it into a 3-bed. If that's an interest from housing people, would I be able to pass inspection as a 3-bedroom, or would they need to rent it as a 2-bedroom? And then, so what happens there?
So in that situation, you could go one of two ways. You could either rent it as a 2-bedroom, and then once you're done with the renovation and making it a legal 3-bedroom, then you could call us back out, and we could do what we're calling a special inspection and make sure that then it would meet the requirements to be a 3-bedroom. And then we could, say for example, the tenant has a 3-bedroom, but they rented it as a 2-bedroom, just to take advantage of that unit, knowing that you're going to make it 3. Then we come out and do a special inspection, and we can refigure their rent portion once we determine it as a 3. So if it takes, a month or 2, we can always come back out and reevaluate it then. Otherwise, the other option would be to just wait and rent it as a 3-bedroom.
And kind of to piggyback on that, so when someone is eligible for a voucher with us, we tell them how many bedrooms they're eligible for. So for LHA, different housing authorities do it differently. For LHA, every 2 adults get 1 bedroom. So we might have mom and her adult son living with her, that's a 1 bedroom. Lots of tenants don't like that, but that's our rule. They can choose to do a 2 bedroom, but they're gonna pick up the cost for that 2nd bedroom. But we also have people who maybe have a 3 bedroom voucher between the adults and the kids, and they go out and look and they can't find a 3 bedroom, they can choose to be in a 2 bedroom if they're not gonna be overcrowded, and that's fine. They don't have to use what we've set for a voucher. That's just for us to determine how much assistance we're gonna provide on that monthly housing assistance payment.
How many bedrooms for kids?
1 bedroom for every 2 kids. So if you have a 3-kid, 2-parent household, they're gonna get a 3 bedroom. How they choose to divvy that up is on them. We also do reasonable accommodations. So sometimes we have someone who's maybe got high medical needs, they've got a hospital bed. It's a 2-adult household that would typically be a 1 bedroom, but because one of the adults, a doctor can give us a medical verification that they meet that disabled definition that's set by HUD, not Social Security. We have a different one for HUD. If they meet that definition, if they meet that because of the hospital bed, oxygen equipment, whatever they have, we can look at approving that and then actually giving them a 2-bedroom voucher.
Right.
Just to clarify, the amount of supervised between the community bedroom and voucher.
If the kids are minors, under 18, that would be a 2-bedroom. Yeah.
What's the most common reason you see with turnover with this program? I mean, you see a lot of it. If they're good tenants, take care of the place, or you know?
Yeah, I don't. From what it sounds like with the landlords, I don't think we have the people that we serve don't have any different turnover than anyone else that's renting. It just seems like from what the landlords have shared with us that it's pretty common for what's going on. We have those tenants that are the pain in the butt tenants that cause problems. They cause problems with us, they cause problems with the landlord, and then we have other tenants who have been in a unit for 15 years and they have no complaints, they're causing any problems. So it's the typical mix, I think. That
Maybe I missed this because I came late. Are we able to ask you, like, get a reference of that tenant if they called about one of our units?
If they rented from us, yes. But if they weren't one of our tenants, then you would have to go to whatever landlord that they work with.
Oh, okay. So you don't have like a note signed from other landlords that they call.
If a tenant, say, for example, moves out of a unit, and sometimes basically if a landlord doesn't do a walkthrough prior to them moving out, for example, and so the tenant moves out, then the landlord goes in and does the walkthrough, and there's way more damages than what their deposit would cover. If they contact us and, say, for example, provide documentation like, okay, here's $3,000 in damages. Well, we can't give personal information on tenants. If a landlord calls and says, hey, do you have anything, I'm considering renting to them, do you have anything that you'd like to share? We can tell you factual information like that. Like, hey, it looks like after they moved out, the landlord said that they still owed them $3,000. But that landlord still has to pursue them like they would any other tenant at that point, because we can't hold them liable after they've already moved and received a transfer to move elsewhere. But at least then if a landlord calls for a reference and we have that documented, we can make you aware of that.
It sounded like there was a distinction or a walkthrough before they moved out.
So with inspections, we do move-in inspections. We do not do move-out inspections. We tell landlords that's where we recommend that if you have a tenant, you should do a walkthrough prior to them moving out. Now, if a tenant is leaving on good terms with you and they've received or they're going to receive a transfer to move, we typically do that once they give their 30-day notice. So then at that point, we would recommend prior to like the day of them moving when they've already gotten their voucher, if you do a walkthrough with them just to get a general idea of what the unit condition looks like, we'll have landlords that'll say, look, walking through here, it looks like they've done a ton of damage. There's no way that their deposit's going to cover this. If they give us a breakdown and it's realistic, we'll document that in their file, and or say they didn't pay any of their utilities and you find that out prior to them moving. If we have that information, then we can say, okay, you're not in good standing with this landlord. You need to resolve this before you can use your voucher to move somewhere else, because we don't want them to do that, you know, to another landlord too. So, but we have to have that information prior to them receiving that transfer right before they move. You know, if they moved out August 31st and we don't know this information until September 5th and they're already assisted somewhere else, we can't go back and take it away from them. But it's if we know it before we sign any contract with somebody else. Any other questions? Yeah.
What about random inspections? You guys do those?
Occasionally. So we call them special inspections. If a landlord contacts us and says, you know, I've got a tenant that I'm concerned that their housekeeping is atrocious. Well, at that point, we're going to tell you, you've got a lease, you're going to have to enforce your lease. We do annual inspections, obviously, to make sure that they're keeping up with the unit, but if it's just a special inspection, we would tell you to enforce your lease. We do occasionally get complaints from tenants, and they'll say, you know, my landlord's not fixing this. Well, to try and partner with the landlords too, we tell tenants that they have to notify us in writing, unless it's something like an emergency, like no heat. We require that they give us notice in writing. And then what we do is we mail a letter to the landlords and the tenant with a copy of that notice to make sure you're aware. Because a lot of times, you know, we will send out to tenants and say, well, I've told them and they just don't respond. And then we'll get a call from the landlord, this is the first I've heard of it. So we give you that notice and we say, hey, if it's not resolved in 10 days, then you can call us and request a special inspection, and then we'll come out and do the special inspection. Now, if a tenant does that and say, for example, they passed their inspection the first time when they moved into the unit, well, then we will inspect the unit for 2 years. But then if we get complaints and we come out and do a special, that voids that 2-year benefit, so then we're gonna come out next year and do an inspection too. Because then at that point, it's under a radar and then, you know, but there might be cause of concern. Oh, so tenant defects, that's, I guess, one thing. So when we go out and do an initial inspection, you know, once the unit passes, if we go out and do an annual inspection and say we go into a unit and there's 5 holes in a wall, well, we're not going to require that the landlord fix that. We're going to cite it as a tenant defect. Now, a lot of times landlords will fix it because you want it to be to your standard, but you can bill the tenant for those repairs and things like that. But we'll cite it as a tenant defect, because then if the tenant doesn't take care of it or resolve it and make it good with you within that 30 days when we go back and do a recheck inspection, then they could potentially lose their housing assistance. So that, we tell tenants that information too, because if, you know, if their housing's in jeopardy, typically they're gonna try and take care of that unit and make sure that they don't lose their housing assistance, because typically they've waited for a year to 2 years before they've received that assistance. So we do try and keep them liable on that too. Anything else? Yeah?
Do you have a lot of tenants that lose their vouchers?
So we actually track data for tenants. So we typically have about 35 to 40 every month that no longer keep their voucher. It doesn't mean it was because something the tenant did that was a negative. They can lose their voucher because they don't follow through with their appointment and get us the verifications. We actually have tenants who save up money while they're on assistance with us, and they go out and buy a house. So the 30-ish, 35 to 40 that go off every month are for a variety of reasons. But yeah, we have turnover with some of those, but we also have about, even though we have 3,079 vouchers, I think we have about 2,700 of those vouchers utilized. So that's a pretty small percentage out of all the tenants who are out with the voucher.
What are some of the most common inspections you look for, items to look at on a property?
So common things that would cause a unit to fail or just
Yeah.
So typically when we come out and do an initial inspection, we do require screens on any windows that are used for living. So not like a basement window, like in a laundry area or something like that, but like living room, bedrooms, kitchen, bathroom, anywhere that there's a window that is a space used for living, there has to be a screen on the window for the initial inspection. That's a common fail item. All the doors have to open and close and latch. There has to be either an exhaust fan or a window in the bathroom for ventilation. Carbon monoxide detectors are now required in any units with fuel burning appliances or attached garages, and that's on every level of the home. Smoke detectors are a common thing that fail. Appliances have to work as though designed. So something that we do see quite a bit is, broken knobs on the oven, for example, or just different makeshift things on appliances. That's a common thing. Tripping hazards. Electrical hazards, a common thing that we see is broken cover plates on like light switches, things like that. Hanging wires, anything like that would cause the unit to fail. Those are probably the most common.
Bugs. Plug-ins.
Yeah, like outlet covers, yeah.
Not with the plugs. The 2 broke or 3 fine.
Oh, like GFCI, yeah. Yeah.
All plugs have to be grounded.
Depends. There's some variation there on the year that the unit's built, things like that. If it was, depending on how close it is to a water source, if it has to come GFCI outlet, things like that.
What about peeling paint?
Lead-based paint, peeling paint. So if there's kiddos under the age of 6 and the unit was built before 1978, we figure if we're going to cite for clearance or not based on the square footage, and how large of an area of peeling paint there is. If there's peeling paint and there's kids in the house, we're always going to require that it's addressed. But if it was kids under 6 and before 1978 and there's peeling paint, then we will call clearance on it if there's a large area of peeling paint or chalking or cracking paint. If we call clearance on it, then basically you have to have a certified renovator come out and make the repair or do the painting, and then have a clearance examiner come out and certify that the unit's safe. So sometimes they're doing soil testing, sometimes they're just doing a visual assessment, sometimes they're using an XRF gun to test that the unit's lead safe. Basically, before we'll pass the inspection, we have to have that clearance report certifying all of that. And here we do have, if it fails in the winter months, so between October 1st and April, if it fails, we give a winter extension so that then you have until end of June to make that repair, to buy you a little bit of time for the winter months. But otherwise, it's typically a 30-day defect, or if it's an initial inspection, it has to be done prior to them moving in.
Did you have a question, sis? Oh, I was just going to ask about emotional support animals who quite a few years, people applying cap animals or who?
Well, great data.
Yeah, I don't know if they have data on that for sure. I mean, I think it's kind of, I would assume the same across the board for housing tenants or non-housing tenants. I mean, I know we do have them, but I don't know the data is a lot.
Steve.
Quite crew.
Great.
Well, if at any point you guys do have questions, myself or Mackenzie, we walk landlords through the process, new landlords through the process all the time. My card's in those packets, Jodie's card's on the packets as well. If you guys ever have any questions on the program or, especially some tenant eligibility, anything like that, you can always reach out and give us a call. Thanks, Ann. Okay. Oh, yes.
Right now, Brett Curzon Ren. Well, people if they can't buy houses in the states of the ladies send prayer.
I mean, the rent increases are consistent for us. I mean, every month I would say on average we get between 100 and 150 rent increases that our inspections team has to process every month, just based on the market.
And I'm going to put good detail notes on that.
As far as like the pressure for tenants to find places to live, I've worked here for about 2 years now at LHA. And we had applications that were over a year old for the elderly families or disabled. And now we're at about 8 to 9 months. So we're working through our wait list quicker. But I think a lot of times we get those folks, the single, non-disabled, non-families applying for assistance, and we have applications that are like from 2014, just because we don't get through our other folks. So there could be some of those that are applying, but we don't look at that as we aren't able to serve them at this point.
Does all the money stay in Lincoln, like Guthrie County? What is it?
So for all the assistance that we get, the subsidized housing that we have from HUD is Lincoln only. It is not Lancaster County even. It stays here in Lincoln. We do have the exception of some people it's called porting. They take their voucher, they want to go to another place, or we have people who shop, waitlist shop is what we call it. So we have people who are maybe living in a part of the country where their waitlist is closed and it's really hard to get a voucher. They come here, they want to get a voucher and take it back to where they're at. They have to be leased up here for a year. If the agency where they want to take their voucher is their cost of living, their fair market rent is higher than ours, we don't let them take a voucher to go. Unless they have domestic violence as an exception to that rule, and a reasonable accommodation is an exception to that rule. But otherwise, what we've run into in the past where as a move to work agency, we're able to restrict that porting. Other public housing agencies are not able to. So if someone says, I want to go somewhere, and you might pay $1,100 for a 2-bedroom unit and it's going to cost $2,800 where they want to go, they have to let them go, even if that receiving agency is going to bill that original one because they don't have any vouchers left. But we have restricted that as a move to work agency. We don't let them take the voucher if it's a higher cost of living. If it's the same amount or lower than here, or that receiving agency is going to absorb the cost of that voucher, then they can go. But other than that, the money stays here. Any other questions? Did we say anything that's going to sway any of you guys to be like, I am going to take Section 8?
Maybe.
Maybe? Hey, we'll take a maybe.
Maybe no.
Okay, we'll turn it back over to you, John.